The first thing they did was kick him. Not a hard kick, not one meant to kill, but a lazy shove with a boot, like you would prod a fallen animal to see if it was still twitching. When he didn't move, they laughed. Loud, howling, gut-busting laughter that echoed off the broken cliffs of the crash site. One of the assassins leaned over him, pulled a marker from his belt, and without an ounce of shame, started doodling on the unconscious man's cheek. A little curly mustache, a pair of crossed eyes. Another assassin, larger and wearing a sash of some kind of high-rank insignia, posed proudly with a foot on the man's ribs, throwing a mock salute for the others to capture on their devices. They circled him like a bunch of drunk tourists around a fallen statue, making jokes about how Earth must be desperate if it was sending out wounded primitives like this one to fight real warriors. They didn't see the man's fingers twitch ever so slightly when they grabbed at him. They didn't notice the slow, purposeful breaths beneath the torn fabric of his armor. And they definitely didn't notice the faint glint of a tattoo inked deep across his ribs until one of them tried to tear open his uniform for a better laugh and froze mid-rip. The laughter died almost immediately. In the gray light filtering down through the smoke and twisted wreckage, they could all see it. For bold letters, blackened into scar tissue that seemed to almost hum against the battered skin, Reaper. For a single stunned second, nobody moved. Then the man's eyelids snapped open. Ice-cold steel burned in those eyes, and the lazy, mocking smiles vanished as if erased by a gust of wind. The wounded man bared his teeth in something that might have been a grin if it hadn't been so full of murder, and in a hoarse, broken voice he whispered, "You're standing in the wrong crater." They didn't even have time to scream. The ground shuddered beneath them as a series of small, well-placed charges detonated underfoot. Smoke and dirt blasted into the air, and the assassins staggered, their sleek boots sliding over the unstable rock. Before they could recover, the man moved. He didn't rise like a normal soldier would. He rolled into motion, grabbing a piece of shattered alloy from the ground and driving it up into the throat of the nearest alien with sickening precision. The body dropped like a stone, the laughter replaced by horrified shouting. Two more tried to draw their weapons, but the man was already moving, low and fast, ducking under their aim and snatching a plasma pistol from the fallen assassin's belt. One shot. Two. Both hits. Both kills. Panic spread through the survivors. They weren't facing a wounded animal anymore. They were standing inside a trap designed to kill them all, and the so-called wounded man was using the crash itself as a weapon. Half the group broke ranks immediately, trying to fall back to the wreckage where their extraction beacon was flashing in the distance. It was a tactical mistake of breathtaking stupidity. The man, the Reaper, had set charges along the fallback path, and as the first alien crossed the invisible line, a web of sharpened debris laced with monofilament wire erupted from the ground, slicing through armor like it was wet paper. The ones who remained realized they couldn't run without dying and they couldn't stay without fighting. But fighting was not going to be easy. Every movement they made triggered some new horror: tripwires, collapsing ledges, magnetic mines buried just deep enough to snap onto their power armor and detonate a second later. The battlefield wasn't random chaos. It was a symphony of death, and Reaper was the conductor, bleeding and battered but grinning like a lunatic as he picked them off one by one. One assassin, braver or dumber than the others, managed to close the distance and tackled him to the ground. They struggled, snarling in a mixture of languages, but even wounded, the man fought like a wild animal. A cracked knee to the gut, a sharp elbow to the throat, and the alien gasped and crumpled, his own knife buried between his ribs. Reaper staggered to his feet, blood running down his side, his breathing heavy but controlled. His uniform hung in tatters, revealing more tattoos that looked less like decorations and more like warnings. The last three assassins regrouped, back to back, their guns sweeping the smoke. They muttered into their comms for backup, but the jamming field Reaper had triggered during the crash was still active. No calls were getting out. No help was coming. One of them, trembling, raised his weapon in desperation and shouted something about surrender. Reaper simply tilted his head, almost curious, then shot him without a word. Another tried to run for higher ground, scrambling up a shattered ridge of engine debris, But he made the mistake of putting his foot down on a glittering patch of dirt. Another trap. He screamed once as the ground gave way and he vanished into a pit lined with jagged metal. Now there was only one left, a female assassin whose arrogance had evaporated into pure terror. She stared at Reaper, weapon shaking in her hands, knowing exactly who, or what, she was dealing with now. The stories had been whispered for years across black market ports and mercenary bars, stories of Earth's deadliest operatives, of the shadow units that weren't supposed to exist. Project Scythe. The Reapers. Soldiers so lethal they were considered weapons of mass destruction in human form. The assassin fired, wild and desperate, but Reaper didn't even flinch. He sidestepped the first bolt, let the second graze his shoulder, and walked straight through the third, pain written across his face but not slowing him down. She kept firing until the charged pack hissed empty. Then she dropped the weapon and tried to beg, hands raised high, shouting a language he barely understood. He paused in front of her, cocking his head slightly, studying her like one might study a bug on a window. "You should have run," he said, almost gently, then drove a boot into her chest and sent her sprawling. She scrambled, coughing and sobbing, but he ignored her now. His attention was on the distant signal beacon, still flashing weakly from the wreckage. Reinforcements would come eventually. Bigger ones. Smarter ones. But by the time they arrived, he would be gone. And the only thing they'd find would be a massacre and a message scorched into the earth with plasma fire. A single word, brutal and final. Reaper. And for the first time in the assassin's long, brutal history, they would realize that it wasn't Earth that should be afraid. It was them. The beacon's faint pulsing light kept blinking in the smoky haze, a distant reminder that more were coming. Reaper knew he had minutes, maybe less, to shift the battlefield again before it tilted too far in their favor. He moved with a limp now, dragging his injured leg slightly, but his hands worked with cold precision, resetting tripwires, adjusting mines, checking the tension on his improvised traps. Every movement hurt. Every step made his muscles scream. But none of that mattered. Pain was just background noise, a familiar companion he had long ago learned to ignore. He wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to teach them a lesson they would never forget. Across the smoke, shapes began to move. New assassins, faster and heavier, loaded with fresh gear, advanced cautiously over the cratered ground. They had learned from their dead comrades, at least a little. They scanned every inch ahead of them, moving slow, covering each other with overlapping fields of fire. Good. Smart enemies made the hunt interesting. Reaper waited, hidden in a shallow depression behind a pile of burning wreckage. His mind wasn't just calculating escape routes now. It was orchestrating a full-scale counterattack. They thought they were hunting him. They thought numbers and technology would fix their earlier stupidity. But numbers didn't matter if you controlled the ground underfoot. As the lead squad moved into the kill zone, one of the aliens, armored from head to toe in sleek black plates, spotted something glinting on the ground. He barked a warning and gestured for a drone to fly over it. The drone scanned the ground carefully, found the tripwire, and sent a little pulse of energy to disarm it. The wire snapped harmlessly. The squad laughed. They moved forward again, more confident. Reaper's mouth twisted into a grin. That wire wasn't meant to kill them. It was meant to make them think they were safe. 15 paces later, the real trap triggered. A field of shaped charges buried beneath the loose rocks exploded upward, launching a cloud of sharp-edged shrapnel at thigh height. The leading 3 assassins went down hard, their armor punctured and legs shredded. The rest broke formation immediately, ducking behind cover, shouting commands. Chaos returned, and with it, fear. Reaper used the noise to move, slipping through the smoke like a ghost. He didn't fire yet. He didn't need to. His traps did most of the killing for him. At one point, 2 assassins tried to flank wide around the left, thinking they had found a blind spot. They didn't see the narrow path laced with microcharges magnetized to react to metallic signatures. Their armor triggered the field, and a second later they were little more than scorched craters in the ground. The assassins were beginning to panic again. He could hear it in their movements, see it in the way their formation frayed and broke under pressure. They tried calling for air support, tried marking his last known location with bright energy markers, but nothing worked. The canyon's walls, twisted from the crash, blocked line-of-sight targeting, and Reaper kept shifting positions faster than their primitive battlefield algorithms could adapt. One of the commanders, a particularly angry-looking brute with twin plasma axes strapped to his back, took charge and began rallying the survivors. He ordered 2 squads to advance on either side while a third stayed back to provide cover fire. For a moment, it almost looked like they were adapting properly. That was fine. Reaper liked it when they fought back. It made breaking them so much sweeter. As the squads moved in, he circled wide, approaching the rear group providing cover. They were so focused on scanning the smoke and debris for him that they didn't think to check behind them. By the time the first one noticed movement, it was too late. Reaper struck fast and silent, using the knife he had scavenged earlier. 1 silent kill. 2. 3. Then he grabbed one of their plasma rifles and opened fire on the squads ahead, making it seem like their own men were shooting at them. In the confusion, a few of the assassins turned and fired back, cutting down their own allies before realizing the deception. It was beautiful, in a grim sort of way. Like watching wolves tear each other apart because someone had thrown meat between them. The last commander realized the trick just in time to see Reaper vanish into the smoke again. His roar of frustration echoed across the battlefield, and he ordered a full advance, abandoning cover in favor of overwhelming force. They surged forward, reckless now, desperate to pin Reaper down before he could disappear again. It was exactly what he wanted. The next trap wasn't subtle. A massive slab of broken home metal had been propped up against a natural ridge, looking like part of the crash debris. When enough assassins moved underneath it, Reaper detonated the charges at its base. The slab fell with a deafening crash, crushing several of them instantly and blocking the rest from moving forward. The few survivors scrambled to regroup, but by now, the battlefield was littered with bodies and wreckage, the air thick with smoke and static. Communications were almost entirely dead. Visibility was reduced to a few feet. The assassins who had once been so confident, so eager to mock the primitive human they thought they captured, were now huddled together like frightened children, scanning the darkness for the ghost that was hunting them. In the center of the crater, the extraction beacon still blinked its lonely pulse. It seemed almost absurd now, a flashing reminder of how badly they had underestimated the situation. Reaper didn't bother hiding anymore. He stepped out of the smoke, bloody, torn, half limping, half smiling. They fired the moment they saw him, panicked bursts of plasma bolts that scorched the ground around him but failed to hit their mark. He didn't run. He didn't dodge. He just kept walking forward, like death itself, inevitable and relentless. The assassins began to retreat, abandoning the battlefield entirely, scrambling for the canyon edges where their transport ships were supposed to be waiting. But even that escape was a lie. Earlier, Reaper had reprogrammed the beacon to send a false distress call. Area clear. Safe for extraction. The transports that responded would be coming in low and slow, assuming the battle was over. And they would fly right into the canyon's final trap. Reaper watched from the shadows as the ships appeared, their engines humming. He waited until they were close enough, then triggered the last sequence. Hidden charges detonated along the canyon walls, collapsing them inward in a massive landslide. One transport managed to pull up in time, engines screaming as it fled into the upper atmosphere. The others weren't so lucky. They were crushed under tons of rock and debris, their burning wrecks joining the graveyard Reaper had made. The ruins smoked and crackled as Reaper moved through them, slow but deliberate, like a surgeon cleaning up after a brutal operation. The battlefield was silent now, except for the occasional groan of bending metal and the distant hiss of fires dying out. Yet under that silence lay a new sound, subtle but unmistakable, the whispered pulse of fear. It wasn't coming from Reaper. It was coming from the few assassins who had survived, now hiding among the rocks, hoping to vanish before he found them again. Some had dropped their weapons altogether. Others sat motionless, hoping their stillness would make them invisible. But Reaper wasn't hunting with his eyes. He was hunting with something much older, much more dangerous: intuition. He knew exactly how fear smelled, how it sounded, how it changed the rhythm of breathing and shifted the weight of footsteps. Fear was louder than any scream if you knew how to listen. The aliens had been trained to believe humans were emotional liabilities, that they broke easily under pressure. Their intelligence networks had fed them videos of human protests, petty political squabbles, even centuries-old battlefield losses to paint Earth's warriors as disorganized and fragile. They never showed the real footage. They never taught their assassins about the stubbornness buried deep in humanity's bones. They didn't understand that fear, for a human, wasn't the end of the fight. It was the beginning. Reaper found the first survivor crouched under a slab of twisted fuselage, his weapon clutched to his chest like a child's toy. The assassin's armor, once gleaming, was battered and cracked, and his hands trembled visibly even as he tried to aim his gun. Reaper simply walked up to him, watching the alien's eyes widen with a mixture of disbelief and horror. Without a word, Reaper disarmed him, snapping the rifle in half over his knee and tossing the pieces aside like garbage. He left the assassin there, paralyzed by terror, a living message to the others. This was never about killing every last one. It was about breaking their spirits so completely that they would carry the fear with them forever. That was the real mission. Not just survival. Psychological warfare. Reaper moved on, weaving between broken structures and shattered stone, his mind playing a dual track of memory and instinct. He remembered his training, not the sanitized lectures about tactics and logistics, but the brutal field exercises where instructors tried to break him in body and mind. Where mistakes were punished not with reprimands but with pain and isolation. Where he learned that pain was just data, that fear was just another signal to process and overcome. Those lessons had been burned into him, deeper than any tattoo, deeper than flesh and blood. Another assassin broke from cover ahead, trying to sprint for the canyon's edge. Reaper didn't chase. He didn't have to. The assassin ran straight into a dead zone where the canyon walls narrowed sharply, funneling movement through a single point. Reaper had set up a simple trip mine there hours ago, long before the first shot was fired. The explosion was small but decisive. The alien's body was thrown sideways into the rocks, limp and broken before it even hit the ground. No cheers followed. No cries of triumph. Just more silence, deep and heavy, pressing down on the survivors like a second gravity. The few assassins left alive huddled together now, whispering frantically among themselves. Reaper watched from a distance, noting how they argued, shoved each other, tried and failed to pick a leader. Without orders, without clear direction, they were nothing but frightened individuals in expensive armor. One of them, smaller than the others, seemed to snap first. He stood up, threw his weapon down, and started shouting into the smoke, calling out in a language Reaper half recognized from old field manuals. It was a plea for negotiation, for a ceasefire, maybe even surrender. It might have worked against another opponent. Against a wounded soldier clinging to life, it might have been a smart move. But not against Reaper. Not against the man they had mocked, beaten, and left for dead hours ago. Reaper didn't answer the plea. He didn't even acknowledge it. He let the assassin stand there, shouting into the void, while he circled silently through the wreckage, positioning himself for the final play. As the assassin's voice grew louder, more desperate, Reaper moved closer to the group, unseen and unheard. They were so focused on their spokesman that they never noticed the silent figure flanking them until it was too late. He struck without warning, a blur of motion and violence. A plasma knife through a throat here, a swift kick to a knee joint there. Within seconds, the group was in disarray again, shouting and firing wildly in all directions. Reaper stayed low, weaving between them, a phantom of pain and precision. He didn't need overwhelming force. He needed only confusion, fear, and momentum. In less than a minute, the ground was littered with bodies, some alive and groaning, some very much not. The spokesman assassin, realizing his mistake, turned to run, but Reaper caught him with a thrown shard of metal, pinning him to the canyon wall by his armor plate. Breathing heavily now, the wounded man stood amidst the wreckage, surveying his work. Every trap, Every tactic, every moment of feigned weakness had led to this. Not total annihilation, but complete domination. Reaper wasn't just a soldier. He was a force of nature designed for one purpose: to teach arrogance a lesson in humility through blood and terror. It wasn't enough that these assassins lost. They needed to remember why they lost. They needed to take the memory of this day back to their commanders, back to their worlds, and spread it like a virus. They needed to tell everyone they knew that Earth wasn't a hunting ground. It was a graveyard for the overconfident. He moved to the extraction beacon, now flickering weakly as if even the machine was exhausted. He tore the cover off and reprogrammed it with a few swift commands, using codes burned into his memory long ago. The new message was short, brutal, and designed to punch through the thickest encryption: operation complete. Extraction denied. Casualties classified. Threat level: Reaper class. It would reach the orbiting ships soon enough. By then, Reaper would be long gone, a ghost vanishing into the wilds of a broken world. As he finished, he allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. He knelt briefly among the ruins, letting the smoke and dust settle over him like a second skin. His body screamed in protest, and for the first time in hours he let himself feel it. The broken ribs, the torn muscles, the exhaustion clawing at the edges of his mind. It didn't matter. Pain was temporary. Victory was forever. Somewhere out there, fresh enemies were already hearing whispers of what had happened here. Of the man who had turned their best killers into a cautionary tale. They would plan, they would adapt, they would come harder next time. And Reaper would be waiting. Smiling that broken, bloody smile. Ready to teach them all over again what it meant to underestimate a human. Ready to remind them that Earth didn't send heroes to wars like this. Earth sent monsters. Earth sent Reapers. The canyon still reeked of scorched metal and ozone as Reaper made his way toward the far end, dragging his injured leg behind him and wiping blood from his eyes. He had no illusions about what was coming next. The first waves had been scouts, elite assassins maybe, but not the real strike teams. They never sent their best until they had underestimated you badly enough to pay for it. Now they would come harder. Smarter. Angrier. Somewhere overhead, a carrier would already be shifting course, rerouting shock troops or heavier enforcers to clean up what they believed was a manageable threat. They would expect him to be wounded, trapped, desperate. They would expect him to bunker down and try to survive until extraction. Reaper had other plans. He wasn't going to wait for the next wave to corner him. He was going to set the board on fire before they ever made their move. Moving through the wreckage, he scavenged what he could from the fallen assassins and the remains of his own ship. Ammunition was low, but he didn't need much. What he needed were explosives, cutting charges, signal boosters, anything that could be repurposed into traps or distractions. His fingers worked mechanically, even as his mind stayed 3 moves ahead. By the time the next team hit ground, this canyon wouldn't just be a battlefield. It would be a tomb. As he worked, Reaper thought briefly about home, about the blue skies of Earth he hadn't seen in years, about the people who would never know his name or what he had done here. That was fine. Reapers didn't fight for medals or parades. They fought for silence. For peace earned by making sure no one ever dared cross that invisible line again. The tremor under his boots was his first warning. Drop ships. Heavy ones this time. The hum of their engines was a deeper, throatier growl, vibrating through the canyon floor like an approaching storm. Reaper moved quickly, rigging his new traps into place. The trick wasn't to kill them all head-on. That would be suicide. The trick was to funnel them, to herd them where he wanted them, and then let their own caution do half the work. He knew how these teams operated. Standard protocol would be a pincer maneuver, 2 squads moving from opposite ends of the canyon to trap him in a crossfire. Good in theory. Fatal in practice when the terrain itself wanted you dead. The first squad hit ground hard, boots slamming into the cracked stone with military precision. He watched them from a high ledge, counting helmets, noting weapons. They had heavier armor, better rifles, even deployable shields. Good. It would make the humiliation even sweeter. The second squad came down from the opposite end, slower, more methodical, sweeping for traps with advanced scanners. Reaper smiled grimly to himself. Advanced scanners didn't mean much when the traps weren't electronic. He had gone old school this time. Primitive explosives triggered by pressure plates disguised under thin layers of debris. Hidden pits camouflaged with local vegetation. Tension traps rigged with salvaged wire and weighted spikes. Technology didn't save you when the ground itself turned against you. The squads advanced cautiously, but inevitably, they moved exactly as he predicted, narrowing into the center of the canyon, focused entirely on their prey. They didn't see the real danger. Not until the first mine detonated under a shield unit, blowing the operator backward into the arms of his comrades. They shouted warnings, recalibrated their scans, adjusted their advance, but it was too late. The trap had already been sprung. The ground around them came alive with chaos. Shards of metal and concussive blasts turned their formation into a mess. They tried to regroup, but every fallback point had been booby-trapped, every safe zone riddled with new threats. Reaper moved through the smoke and confusion like a shark through bloodied water. He didn't engage directly. He didn't need to. He let them exhaust themselves fighting ghosts and phantoms. Occasionally, he would fire a shot from a new angle, sowing more confusion. Occasionally, he would trigger a small blast just to herd them a little more. By the time the squads realized they were being herded, they were already trapped in a natural basin surrounded by high walls. There was no easy cover, no clear retreat path. Perfect. He climbed higher up the canyon's edge, ignoring the burning in his side, the stiffness in his limbs. This was the final act. He reached the last cluster of charges, carefully buried in the walls hours ago, and triggered the sequence. The charges weren't big enough to bring the walls down completely. Just enough to start a landslide. Enough to fill the basin with falling debris and force the squads into a desperate, chaotic retreat. The rocks thundered down, smashing armor, splitting ranks. Some of the assassins tried to shoot their way clear, others tried to climb, but all of them made the same fatal mistake: they panicked. Panic was the real killer here. Reaper watched with a strange sense of detachment as they tore themselves apart trying to escape a death they had walked willingly into. It wasn't personal. It was just the way it had to be. By the time the dust settled, maybe a handful were still alive, crawling or limping out of the wreckage. Reaper didn't go after them. Let them live. Let them carry the story. Dead enemies told no tales. Survivors sang your legend in fear and trembling. He made his way back toward the central wreckage, where the extraction beacon still blinked stubbornly against the haze. He rechecked the signal override. Good. Still transmitting false codes. Still telling any incoming forces that the area was secure, the threat eliminated. They would send cleanup crews soon, casual, unprepared. They would walk straight into the graveyard their pride had built. Reaper sat heavily on a chunk of shattered hull, finally allowing himself a moment to breathe. His body felt like a patchwork of injuries. His armor was half melted, half torn. His weapons were nearly out of charge. But his spirit, that quiet iron core, was intact. He pulled a small device from a pouch at his waist, a battered transmitter set to a hidden frequency. No official Earth channels. No military IDs. Just a single signal, encrypted and clean. Extraction request. Priority code, Reaper. He flicked the switch and waited, eyes scanning the skies. Minutes passed. Then a single coded light blinked from high above, so faint most would miss it entirely. Extraction acknowledged. No fanfare. No gunships swooping in with banners. Just a single stealth drop vessel descending silently toward the canyon. As he watched it approach, Reaper allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The mission wasn't just survival. It was a message, burned deep into the hearts of every alien who had witnessed it. Earth was not to be trifled with. Earth did not send soldiers to plead for peace. Earth sent Reapers to remind the galaxy that respect could be bought in blood when words failed. When the drop vessel finally touched down on a clear patch of ground, Reaper rose to his feet, every movement stiff but determined. He limped toward the open hatch, the burning wreckage of his battlefield reflected in the vessel's darkened hull. The stars outside the small drop vessel stretched into long, pale ribbons as the ship accelerated away from the ruined canyon and the smoldering battlefield left behind. Inside the cabin, the silence was almost sacred. No chatter, no debriefs, no sterile congratulatory messages. Just the low hum of the engines and the quiet breathing of the man slumped against the steel wall, his head tipped back, eyes closed but mind wide awake. Reaper let the silence wash over him, feeling the weight of the past few hours settle into his bones. The ship wasn't luxurious by any means. Spartan interior, reinforced hull, dark panels built for stealth, not comfort. It suited him just fine. He wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for a place to be invisible again, to vanish until he was needed. Somewhere far above, in the shadowy offices of Earth's defense councils, analysts would be sifting through the raw data feeds from the battlefield, mapping every shot fired, every death recorded. Some would praise the mission as a tactical success. Some would condemn it as an unnecessary provocation. None of them would understand it fully. They would see numbers, ratios, footage. Reaper understood the real outcome. Fear wasn't a data point you could plot on a graph. It was a seed planted deep in the enemy's mind, a seed that would grow into hesitation, second-guessing, strategic caution. It was a quiet, invisible weapon, and it had been deployed perfectly. The pilot, a silent figure hidden behind a dark visor, gave a slight nod without speaking as the ship changed course again, aiming for a deeper orbital path that would take them to the relay station hidden on the dark side of a nearby moon. Extraction protocols demanded no direct return to Earth unless absolutely necessary. Too many eyes watched the skies now. Too many factions waiting for signs of Earth's secret weapons. Reaper stretched slowly, biting down the wince that tried to rise up from his cracked ribs and torn muscles. Pain was good. It reminded him that he was still alive. That he could still be dangerous. That he wasn't done yet. After a while, a faint beep sounded from the ship's console, and a small display flickered to life on the wall opposite him. Mission report incoming. He glanced at it, not really reading, just scanning the essentials. 79 confirmed kills. 2 transport ships destroyed. 4 captured comm logs seeded with this information. 1 surviving commander, identity unknown, presumed escaped. Reaper let the report scroll by, unbothered by the escapee. Survival was part of the design. The survivor would spread the story. That was more valuable than any body count. He closed his eyes again, letting the hum of the ship lull him into a half-sleep. Images floated up behind his eyelids, brief, brutal flashes of the fight, of the mocking laughter before it had turned to screams, of the tattoo burned across his ribs glowing faintly under alien starlight. Reaper. It wasn't a name. It wasn't even a title. It was a promise. A warning wrapped in flesh and blood. Reaper shifted slightly, feeling the ship's slight vibration change as they neared the relay station. It would be a quick stop, enough to offload the mission data, rearm, and maybe patch the worst of his injuries before he was cleared for the next assignment. The drop vessel angled downward toward a dark cleft in the surface of the moon, almost invisible to the untrained eye. A hidden dock slid open beneath them, swallowing the ship in a series of blinking lights and mechanical hisses. As the ship touched down, Reaper stood, rolling his shoulders slowly to get the stiffness out. His armor hung in tatters around him, bloodied and battered beyond regulation standards. Someone would probably give him hell about it later. He smiled grimly at the thought. Let them. Regulation didn't survive in real war zones. Only the brutal, messy, bloody truth survived. The hatch opened with a hiss, and Reaper stepped out into the cool, dimly lit interior of the station. No officers waited for him. No medals. Just a grim-faced technician with a medical scanner who gave him a quick once-over, muttered something about stubborn bastards, and motioned him toward a decontamination corridor. He stripped off his ruined gear mechanically, stepping under the sharp jets of cleansing mist, letting it sting his open cuts and scrub away the worst of the battlefield grime. A clean set of fatigues lay folded at the end of the corridor. Simple. Functional. Anonymous. Just the way he liked it. Once dressed, he made his way to a small operations room where a single supervisor sat behind a wall of displays. The man looked up briefly, nodded, and handed Reaper a data pad without speaking. New assignments. New battlefields. Reaper scanned the list with mild interest. Skirmishes brewing on distant mining colonies. Pirate raiders getting bolder along the trade routes. Mercenary groups gathering around forgotten planets. The galaxy was unraveling at the edges, and Earth's enemies were testing the seams. It didn't matter. Wherever they pushed, he would push back harder. One name caught his eye on the list, a code designation linked to an enemy faction he hadn't seen in years. He set the datapad down without a word, his decision already made. The supervisor seemed to understand without needing an explanation. He tapped a few keys, setting the next mission into motion. Reaper turned and headed for the armory, his mind already shifting gears. Rest was a lie. Recovery was an illusion. There was only the next fight, the next mission, the next lesson to be burned into the bones of anyone foolish enough to think Earth was an easy target. As he moved through the station, technicians and junior operatives stepped aside instinctively, giving him a wide berth. Not out of disrespect. Out of understanding. You didn't get close to a storm and expect to stay dry. You didn't reach out and touch a loaded weapon unless you were prepared to lose a hand. Reaper was both. A storm and a weapon. And even in the sterile halls of an Earth-controlled station, the scent of blood and smoke seemed to cling to him like a second skin. He reached the armory, nodded to the quartermaster, and began selecting his gear. New armor, black and matte, designed for stealth and survival. A compact rifle, perfect for tight quarters combat. A backup blade, balanced perfectly to his grip. A small pouch of shaped charges tucked discreetly at his belt. Tools of the trade. Instruments of the next message he would deliver. He strapped the gear on piece by piece, feeling a strange calm settle over him with each familiar click and buckle. This was his real armor. Not the plates. Not the weapons. The mindset. The certainty. The understanding that there was no going back to normal life, no retirement, no end until the galaxy either learned its lesson or burned trying. Fully armed and ready, Reaper made his way back to the docks where another stealth vessel awaited, engines already humming in anticipation. He paused at the boarding ramp, turning once to look back at the station, the technicians moving like ants along their corridors, the blinking lights and endless signals feeding into the heart of Earth's hidden wars. None of them would ever know what he carried. None of them would ever truly understand the cost of peace. And that was fine. That was why he existed. To bear the burden they didn't even realize they owed.